The start of Chapter 3 and the train station brings two shifts in gameplay, the first being larger enemy groups. World War I styled undead soldiers make their appearance by pouring in droves to the point where sometimes the encounters feel like they overstay their welcome by a tad. They tend to make up these large quantities of enemies, but some others fill that role every now and then. Their only purpose really does seem to be fodder to blow up all at once or to shred through them by the dozen. They don't pose much of a threat, and despite having a rifle, they act like any other melee enemy by charging straight for the player, to which you can hurt them like lambs to the slaughter. They still use their guns every now and then, though their primary focus is trying to bayonet charge you. The difficulty doesn't change from this shift, as you'll still be doing what you have been, except now you get a proper weapon to deal with the crowds. The chain gun rocket launcher is the last gun that the player gets until the expansion, which is 3 entire chapters away. It contributes to the rest of the game feeling repetitive, but the constantly changing tone and scenes does help alleviate some of that, even if it makes the structure of the game a mess. Still, how you fight isn't going to change from now to the end of the game, besides for the bosses. Even if more weapons were introduced, the chain gun is all that you need. Its primary fire launches rockets. That's about it. Like with any explosions in the game, you'll need to be careful as you can hurt yourself far more from the blast than what the enemies can do to you. It shares the same ammo pool as the stake gun's grenade launcher, so you'll never need to use that again. The grenade launcher has at least a guaranteed plus 10 damage over the rockets, but the delay if it doesn't hit a target, it being harder to aim, its arc having a very niche usefulness of going over obstacles, and the demons not differing much in health makes the grenade launcher's advantages obsolete. The secondary fire is the chain gun part. Press and hold the trigger and watch as the bullets fly out. It doesn't have any accuracy issues either. To beat the dead serious horse ham comparison, it's like the minigun but without its small amount of spread. Not like accuracy really matters in either game with how many monsters there are. The chain gun rocket launcher basically replaces the need for any other weapon. It can blow up large crowds, tear through high health enemies, has large ammo pools, high rate of fire, and hit scan bullets. The only issue it has is getting enough ammo for the chain gun part because of how the start of a level strips everything away to the base amount. Also, its range is constrained for both the rockets and bullets, much like every other weapon. It's mainly noticeable in the bigger levels such as the military base. As the late game approaches, it doesn't become much of a problem as you'll get flushed with ammo as you progress through a level. It's just the beginning of each one where it's an issue of trying to go from a famine to a feast. It's a strange design choice. The other weapons are used just to conserve ammo for the chain gun rocket launcher, but the shotgun's freeze blast is still useful for taking out elite enemies in one shot. The electro driver can be useful against hordes, but the rocket launcher can take care of it in an instant with ease. Although the lightning would be helpful if the demons got too close to use rockets if the chain gun doesn't have any ammo left. There's also the fun factor of how much more satisfying the shotgun and stake gun are to use in tandem with this game's physics compared to the chain gun, excluding the rocket launcher since that can blow monsters into pieces. Other than those reasons, there isn't a practical one to use anything else unless you want to spice things up to starve off the repetition. You can probably say something similar about a bunch of games, but it feels rather prevalent to Painkiller. The chain gun rocket launcher is just so versatile, and the enemies not differing by much besides the regular versus elite ones doesn't help create scenarios where one gun might be better to use than another despite inferior stats such as the freeze blast. It's still fun to blast monsters across the arena with the shotgun or pin one to the wall with the stake gun, but it's hard to beat the chain gun rocket launcher in any situation.
But let's face it, you're not going to be thinking about the balls-deep implications of weapon balance when you're busy blowing someone's brains out with a shotgun.
Sounds like I don't have a strong pull-out game. I think People Can Fly focused a bit too hard on the dual weapon mechanic and suffered for it. It's a neat idea, but they seem to try to create a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. In their own words, they implemented this mechanic because it allows for weapon combo attacks like shooting a rocket in the air for increased damage or propelling a grenade further by shooting it mid-air with a stake, and that it's much easier to pick between 5 weapons than 10 or 20. Other interviews add on to that last part with how players will end up using 2 or 3 weapons out of 30 given to them. Ignoring the exaggeration, this whole statement just screams irony. Starting with the weapon combos, they just don't matter with how quickly everything dies. There is no need for extra damage considering that the Freeze Blast allows for one-hit kills on elites. One of the examples given is juggling an enemy with a rocket to deal more damage to it in the air with the chain gun. I have never seen an enemy get juggled in the air unless it was a dead ragdoll. Even then, most monsters would die just from the rocket. All of the combos sound cool on paper, but none of them have any incentives to use them besides to look cool. I'm sure there are people out there that finished Painkiller without knowing that there is a combo system, especially since neither the game nor the manual mention it. The stake gun propelled grenades and electrified shuriken traps are nice for further range and splash damage respectively until the rocket launcher is obtained. Past then, those two combos are inferior to just using a rocket. If they were removed entirely, I wouldn't miss their absence, since the enemy count doesn't increase by that much until the rocket launcher is available. For the easier choice between 5 weapons than 10 or 20 line, I don't understand how this was an issue to begin with. Weapons in games are given gradually so that the player learns and understands how they function, as well as building up the muscle memory to know which key binding it is or how far to scroll with the mouse wheel to get it. They're all usually different from one another, and it's up to the game developers to make sure that they're all balanced to prevent players from relying on only a fraction of them. I get really bad decision paralysis at times, but I have never had a problem with figuring out what weapon I want to use in a video game. Painkiller would suffer the same fate that they project onto other games if every gun was given to the player at once, but no game does that unless it knows that the player is already familiar with them. That would be confusing for anyone if they suddenly had a bunch of new guns. It can apply to a single new gun too, depending on how familiar the player is with first-person shooters and if the gun is a common staple to the genre or not. In Painkiller's case, this applies to every weapon. No one would intuitively know that the rocket launcher is the same gun as the chain gun, or that a stake gun has a grenade launcher, or that a shuriken thrower can fire lightning. But like I said, weapons are given gradually to let a player learn them first before more are added in. Their statement about quality over quantity and how some weapons are just mutations of one another is a design and balancing problem. And these things aren't linear. It's more like a negative parabola where there is an optimal amount of weapons to give a player, given the game size, mechanics, and everything else to maximize quality. In reality, that parabola is more like a plane in a dimension that we can't visualize. Yet, it's not something that can be easily quantified since it is so complex. That's where the artistic human intuition comes into play. The weapons in Painkiller may be unique, but their uses are all rather similar. The stake gun's grenade launcher may be different from the rocket launcher, but there is no reason to use the grenade launcher anymore, even if they didn't use the same ammo pool. The shuriken thrower may be different from the chain gun, but there is no reason to use it anymore unless you run out of ammo or just for fun. Even then, I'd just use the shotgun. Then there's the issue of weapons not being able to keep up with the game's increasing intensity, such as the Painkiller and stake gun. I don't think they took into account how the weapons actually played, as they fall into the same pitfalls that they project onto other games. When you get to the train station, you may start to have technical issues with the game. There is a save corruption problem where the game will crash when loading a save after the initial load from startup. This seems to be common at the catacombs back in Chapter 1 and the train station here. I somehow fixed or bypassed it by getting to the exit then loading the autosave for the next mission before starting it. Hopefully that might help some of you out there, and it's a common enough issue that there are a good amount of forum posts about it if you need a different solution. I also got soft locked by the progression script not triggering this one time in the military base. For this one, you'll most likely need to load an earlier save as I had to do. There were 2 other times that I thought a soft lock occurred, but it was just me not realizing what I had to do to progress. The game saved me both times with a softlock trigger that activates after a certain amount of time. For the first of them, I didn't have anywhere to go after fighting a wave at the factory, so I ended up trying to grab a piece of armor. Then an explosion occurred in the distance after some time and I could finally progress. You're supposed to shoot the canister to make it explode, which blows a hole open in the building. It was the same deal for the second incident in the military base. I'm not sure how blowing up a barrel to let a truck crash into a gate opens up another gate near where the truck started at, works as a way to progress, but it does. Maybe I'm just dumb, but in my defense, I've noticed other people not knowing how things worked in Painkiller for a variety of things. Not knowing how to progress happened to be mine in the Opera House, factory, and military base. A lot of Painkiller is find out for yourself, so someone could build up a false sense of how something works or not realize it at all. Although I could just be making excuses and I really am dumb in this case. It's a bit hard to tell since I only have other people's playthrough videos to go off of, which could mostly be veteran players who already know what to do. Uncertainty is part of the fun though. Another thing that you might notice as you progress from the train station to the factory is how they have the same enemies. For most levels, with a couple of exceptions, you'll fight about 3 different demons in each one of them. Chapter 3 has the same roster for its length, with an additional 2 enemy types in the military base, and the same goes for Chapter 5's roster except for the monastery, excluding the boss levels by the way. So on top of not getting any more weapons, we now have to fight the same enemies for multiple levels in a row. And on top of that, the majority of enemies function the same as any other by falling into either a melee or ranged category. There are quirks here and there, but for the most part the behavior of the ranged enemies can be summed up as shoot, run around for a bit, then shoot again, and melee enemies as run straight at the player to try and hit them. Some do break the mold like the witches, leper monk necromancers, explosive barrel zombies, and hounds that roll to attack, among others. There just isn't enough to make a sizable difference when the use of them is limited and the rest of the roster are just basic. The kamikaze zombie and the hounds carrying explosive barrels both only show up a single time in the entirety of the campaign, the catacombs and Babel respectively. The witches and necromancers only appear in the plague town, with the witches getting a second appearance in the forest if you're playing on trauma. This is why I get confused when people compare Painkiller to Serious Sam. Yes, they both utilize simple AI, they both have large enemy counts, they both have kamikaze units, and they even have their pathfinding getting stuck on walls, but they differ in how they use their enemies. Painkiller's roster doesn't do teamwork well, or often. There is no encounter design as enemies are just thrown at the player. So every fight functions and feels very similarly, and there aren't really any that stand out. Nothing can outrun the player as long as they know how to bunny hop, leaving melee enemies to be somewhat useless against the player. The large amounts of enemies are purely for blowing up all at once and ripping through with the demon mode. They don't pose much of any threat at all until you get stuck or enclosed. Part of this is due to the odd choice to limit most levels to about 3 different enemies. It's difficult to pull off anything interesting with such a limited amount. One or few fights could work, but eventually it's going to lead to either spam of the same unit or the same repeated fights when stretched over a chapter. There is credit to be given for having so many different demons along with unique assets for every level. Still, it doesn't mean much when the encounters all feel the same. However, most of the blame goes towards using simple AI to a fault. Let's look at an example of how it's done right. Within Serious Sam's alien roster, there are arachnoids and reptiloids. They're both long-ranged attackers who typically perch up on top of buildings to harass the player. They both also tend to not move around unless they're on the ground to get a better angle for attacking the player. Sounds pretty much the same, right? They may fill similar roles, but the way they do so is different. Arachnoids have a hit-scan volley of bullets attack that forces the player to either seek cover or kill it as quickly as possible to avoid further damage. Reptiloids, on the other hand, shoot a projectile that the player can either destroy with their guns or dodge out of the way. This gives the possibility, if the player is skilled enough, to divert most of their attention away from the reptiloid to deal with more urgent threats while still having to account for their attacks. In addition to that, their projectiles can curve around walls and hit the player behind cover, so the arachnoids and reptiloids can complement each other in how they harass the player in different ways. One can force the player into taking cover, and the other can force the player out of cover. Their differences allow the player to express their skill and knowledge over the game by determining who's the biggest threat to kill first, how to avoid damage with all the different incoming attacks, and what approach they'll take to overcome those odds. It's what Crow Team calls dancing with enemies.
Mi to zovemo zapravo ples sa enemijima, gdje ti zapravo ne čučiš na jednom mjestu i izviruješ, nego ti zapravo na velikom prostoru krećeš se lijevo desno izbjegavajući zapravo konstantno si između njih i izbjegavaš njihove napade, što direktne, što njihovih projektila.
which is an apt way of describing it. And this doesn't even touch on the arachnoids and reptiloids having different health values, how effective different weapons are against them, or all of the other enemies that are thrown into the fray. It's a complex interaction between all of these differing yet complementing parts that Painkiller simply does not have. Painkiller needs more differences in its enemies, different stats, different roles, different behaviors that actually make the player have unique reactions and considerations during gameplay. It needs more than just making them different models or watching some of them perform a flying circus routine, more than having most of them feel like fodder. The only ones that do have a difference are the few that I mentioned earlier that have unique actions like the hounds that roll to attack, or the elites only because they don't die in a couple of shots. This is why I haven't talked about the individual enemies all that much. Most are not distinct enough to mechanically stand out from a crowd filled with their allies. I don't agree that Painkiller is like Serious Sam, and even the developers don't agree with that statement. Adrian Hirmilash had to say over and over again in interviews that Painkiller is different from Serious Sam because the public as a whole did and still does make that comparison. He puts it best in one of his interviews, quote, "The thing is, it's really hard to compare Painkiller to anything because basically there are no other arcade action shooters on the market. We have tactical first-person shooters, stealth first-person shooters, etc. But after Serious Sam, there was only Painkiller, and after Painkiller, it seems that it'll be Serious Sam 2. Unquote. It's hard to blame people for making the comparison in the first place because Adrian's right. There aren't many arcade action shooters back then or even today that have as high enemy counts as these two series. But even then, Painkiller doesn't get off the hook for having enemies that all feel the same. How do we keep the adrenaline-inducing action shooter that's closer to Doom than Serious Sam, as stated in an interview? Besides what I just mentioned for the enemies, the answer is right there with Doom 2016, as Painkiller does share some similarities as I've discussed before, but of course, that's looking into the future, relatively speaking. The truth is that Painkiller already has the framework needed to achieve it. We have Maso commanders, hounds, witches, psycho nuns, electrified noodlemen, tanks and anti-air guns, samurai, Loki, and so on, all of which bring something unique to the fight other than the usual that we see from evil monks or ninjas. I think the issue really lies in how it doesn't know what it wants to be. It's difficult to have a cohesive roster of demons when the game is having an identity crisis. Does it want to be a gothic horror shooter, a Japanese horror shooter, a 1 versus 100 shooter, a shooter about the horrors of war, or even a shooter based on theological themes? There are so many influences that everything just gets muddled.
Eksperyment intelektualny. Wymieniamy się opisami, doświadczeniami na temat, czy będą to azjatyckie horrory, czy będą to jakieś niszowe filmy, czy książki. I z tego też czerpiemy inspirację. Ja myślę, że taką drugą rzeczą o konkurencyjnych grach jako źródle głównej inspiracji wymieniłbym coś, co ja nazywam japońską szkołą designu.
There can be multiple influences, but it needs to be planned out and consistent, or else we end up with what we have now. Every chapter, except for Chapter 2, at least sticks with one theme for its locations even if the transitions from level to level sometimes don't connect well. Chapter 2's levels can hop from one theme to another with no transition whatsoever. It greatly helps to have some sort of connection between the levels, something that holds everything together even if it's simple just to keep up the narrative structure. There is nothing, besides the act of killing Lucifer's generals, absorbing demon souls, 2 lines from the angel about a specific destination and Daniel's soul intake, Asmodeus mentioning the next destination, and Alistair also mentioning how souls are clouding Daniel's judgment that connects the gameplay to the story told through the cutscenes. Everything else, like traveling through the levels and the demons that inhabit them, just don't matter to the point where they could be replaced and nothing would be lost. In terms of the story, of course. This excerpt from an interview mentions why that's the case, and keep in mind that this one is translated from Polish. Quote, "We use a simple division. Level is the player's domain, videos between levels are our field. When a player plays in a given level, we don't bother. Let him play however he wants, freedom for everyone. When the level ends, we push the plot forward according to our own vision, which of course we try to make effective and attractive." Unquote. I think this approach swings too far in the direction of being too hands-off because then we just end up with exposition dumps at the end of chapters. Part of the issue too is how we jump from place to place, so it doesn't feel like we're traveling to where Lucifer's generals are. It's more like we're lost and we just happen to stumble upon the one we're looking for. The variety of enemies doesn't help either. We fight ninjas, samurai, zombies, skeletons, witches, World War I undead soldiers, knights, mental patients, biker gangs, tanks, and anti-air guns. It's just a mishmash of a little bit of everything. Their vision of purgatory is one that reflects our world in a dreary way, yet there are tonal clashes all over the place as we've seen throughout the game. It's nonsensical and there isn't any direction given on if we're supposed to be taking all of this seriously or not. The making of movie does say that the game is supposed to be dark, but also goofy at times like a cartoon.
Sami bohatera, ponieważ przez 99% czasu walczy z przeciwnikami. Więc tam staraliśmy się skupić na tych podstawowych ludzkich instynktach, tak właśnie jak zabijanie, terror, przeżycia. W związku z czym, oczywiście, żeby to wszystko było polane fajnym sosem, akurat jest to sos z krwi u nas, ale dzięki temu po prostu gra jest efektowniejsza, tylko jest to jednak pewna przenośnia, pewna karykaturyzacja, pewna komiksowość tego wszystkiego. Że nie jest to realistyczne i nie wzbudza obrzydzenia, jest to bardziej zabawne, chociaż faktycznie kwit w tej grze.
But I just don't get that impression. I only get confused. I'm all for seriously goofy media. I love it. I can't get enough of it, and even my profile picture is an example of one. But I just don't see it melding well with what this game sets itself up as, gothic horror. For example, the ball gags on the Sado commanders. There's no punchline. It's just there without setting the tone necessary for this to make sense in a humorous way and only leaving confusion on why it's there in the first place. It's part of why Painkiller just feels like a series of map packs instead of a campaign. I'm not sure what it wants to be. It started off as horror, but it twists and morphs into anything but that as we progress. They say the game is a horror shooter in interviews, making of movie.
Survival horror a Painkiller to jednak są dwa różne gatunki. Survival horror, przecież główna różnica polega na tym, że gra typu survival horror, jak sama nazwa wskazuje, chodzi tylko o przeżycie, ale w ten sposób, że bardzo często polega to na unikaniu walk. Natomiast w Painkillerze dzieje się dokładnie odwrotnie. To słówko horror jest wspólne, ale jednak po kilku minutach to przeciwnicy zaczynają się martwić, jak przeżyć, a nie główny bohater. My chcemy dać głównemu bohaterowi poczucie mocy, siły i tak zwanego zarządzania. Tym, że jest naprawdę super bohaterem, kimś, kto sam staje przeciwko kilkuset przeciwnikom i potrafi wszystkich pokonać seriami ze swojego talentu.
And show it on the Steam store page. At least they clarified in the making of movie that Painkiller is intended to be a horror shooter in the same way as Doom. So why is there such a mismatch from what was advertised? I have no problem with a game going crazy and throwing a bunch of stuff together to create a unique experience. I do have a problem when the game advertises itself as a horror shooter, makes a sincere effort towards that, has interviews explicitly saying that's what they're working on, and yet we get something that is having an identity crisis. It's a real shame too, because the horror sounds that they have are really good. The ambience throughout the game screams to play this near Halloween. They had something that could have made the game really stand out as the horror shooter, but they never fully committed to it. The publisher did demand that the story be changed to fit an American audience, which did change the original premise. It may sound insulting, but there is some truth to it with fans of this genre in general.
Robiliśmy takie poszukiwania wśród okultystycznych dzieł, wśród również dzieł religijnych, aby stworzyć dość przekonującą historię, czyli tło do gry. Ja wiem, że sporo osób absolutnie tę warstwę gry ignoruje, skupiając się tylko na samej grze, poziomy, strzelaniu itd.
But for the most part, this isn't a thinking man's game so much.
All he has to do is kill the 4 generals of Lucifer's army. And that's really all you need to know about the setup for the game. It's definitely all I personally wanted to know. I could happily have played through the rest of the game without hearing another word from Samael or Daniel and his wife.
You play as Daniel something or other who's trying to do something like avenge his sister and fight hell for whatever reason. Yeah, I skipped the intro cutscene and wasn't really paying attention. And I am not alone in not paying attention to the plot of Painkiller. Literally nobody cares at all.
In Adrian Hirmelash's words, Painkiller was going to be like the movie From Dusk to Dawn, so like a campy action horror game. The publisher then rewrote it to what we know today to something more serious and stoic. People Can Fly retained the creative freedom for everything else. That's why we see demons perform flying circus acts and having ball gags. It was never meant to be a serious story, causing this tonal clash between what we play and see to how the story is told. It's possible that if they just honed in on a central theme or two, then that would force them to work within those constraints to develop a roster of monsters that are utilized better, rather than a unique enemy here and there mixed in with a bunch of others that look different but all act basically the same. Painkiller does have interesting and mechanically different enemies despite their common stats. The problem is that they're all spread out between the levels, causing their impact not to be felt, along with limiting the levels to around 3 enemies too. It's like putting a ton of ice cubes in a flavored drink. The flavor is there, it's just diluted to where it becomes off-tasting water. We can see this issue in the making of movie where they mention creating 70 to 80 different monsters, which includes the expansion, and how it takes several weeks to create an average-sized monster.
Stworzenie przeciętnej postaci potwora to jest...
Także za każdym razem przy robieniu każdego efektu w ruch były wprawiane sztuce z kuchni.
With a development period of 18 months for the base game and assuming 6 months for Battle Out of Hell, that's roughly 3 monsters per month on either end. Things can go faster or slower, but either way the grind of adding in so many different demons probably burnt out any extra creativity to be used on balancing all of them or creating special encounters to use them in. It seems like they got in the motion of things and never took a step back to ask themselves if it's worth it to have all of these enemies, despite their claim of quality over quantity when it came to the weapons. Restraints aren't always a bad thing. They can foster creativity in a studio or in the bedroom. The military base doesn't have much to talk about outside of what has already been said. Still, we can talk about a couple of things. There's a map with coordinates of Jankowice, Poland. I'm not entirely sure what to make of it besides for them to make a James Bond reference with the GoldenEye satellite name in the top right. The maps don't match either. Jankowice seems to be a quiet village, so there's not much of anything to dig into. Except for the treasure hidden at those coordinates. I've heard that's where they stashed Painkiller 2 from very credible sources. Speaking of credibility, in one of the hangars there's a UFO which also doesn't have much significance. Or does it? Given that it's a US military base and it looks like it's in the middle of the desert, it's very likely that this is Area 51. A secret American base that is said to house alien technology. If we go near the UFO, the USSR national anthem plays, as well as a song called Kalinka, which is a Russian folk song. So why does the UFO play this music? We know that Americans hate communists, so it makes sense that they would hide a UFO playing this type of music in a highly classified base to prevent a Red Scare from spreading across the country. But what if the Soviets aren't who we think they are? The sound files sound like transmissions, so maybe the aliens are actually the Soviets in space, and the Nazis are hiding on the dark side of the moon. We can see the hammer and sickle as well as Russian text that says Laika 8 Nostromo on the UFO, possibly a reference to the first dog in space and the spacecraft from the movie Alien, both of which have anti-capitalist origins. But wait, there's more if we listen at the factory level. Within its ambient sounds among the machinery, we can hear alien-like noises. Why else would they be at a factory if they weren't the Reds, or should I say the Greys in this case? Maybe they're colorblind. Since communists love to seize the means of production so much,
That must mean those commie alien bastards are here to steal our jobs. Where the fuck is Duke Nukem? We need him on the line now. Those alien bastards are done for.
Lucifer's next general, Guardian, is another boss that is straightforward and easy once you figure out how the fight works. Shoot his hammer to damage him at first, then after that just keep shooting at his body until he's dead. He can hit you with a shockwave with his hammer or fists, but as long as you jump right before it lands, then you'll take no damage. Like the other bosses, you can die rather quickly on Nightmare. This time, however, you have to fight the arena too with the rubble laying all over the place. It is a big arena, so having a bunch of stone blocks in the way isn't that big of a deal, but it can get a bit tedious. It's nothing compared to what the next boss will bring, and that includes the fall damage incurred when the Guardian's hammer flings you into the air from its shockwave. That's not a good statement to have where one part of the game comes off as not that bad, because a later part is absolutely atrocious in comparison. Anyway, besides blocking your path, the rubble here does pose a threat. It can kill you if it lands on top of you, causing another thing to watch out for, hopefully not from underneath it. Luckily, the physics engine isn't that janky here to where running too fast into one of the stones or getting jammed in between them will kill you. It does happen with specific objects such as the bridge from Chapter 1 or this boulder in the monastery of Chapter 5 that's scripted to roll down the path behind you. However, both of these incidents are issues only when the FPS is capped, so wear protection by putting a cap on it. I've never experienced any random deaths from this rubble, but no method is 100% effective except for not playing the game at all. On very rare occasions, I have died to random physics doubletree and other scenarios with capped FPS. In regards to his name, it's unclear on what he's the guardian of, as he doesn't match any mythological or theological being in its appearance. The arena doesn't give any clues either. The editor does reveal that he's also named Thor after the Norse god. That explains his hammer and its ability to conjure lightning, however there's nothing beyond that. It's more than likely another original monster by People Can Fly, inspired by Thor. They probably changed his name in the game to avoid any confusion on that. If we look into one of Thor's roles, he is noted to be a guardian, so that's probably where the rename came from. It feels wrong to say since he's an actual mythological figure, yet with all these other inclusions in the game, someone in the team must have really been into comics. Also, somebody has been shitposting in the Polish version of the wiki. How did we get here?
I want answers.
Me too, buddy. Daniel here is having a bit of an outburst, which is understandable. He still thinks he lived a pure life and should be in heaven with Catherine, yet he keeps getting told that he's not pure. We then get this dramatic moment of him threatening the angel and blasting his hand off.
Jesus, that's not going to impress him either.
We do get confirmation that Eve gets information on where the demonic forces are quicker than Heaven does, and that they don't share it. This comes from the line,
I've come to tell you that some of the demonic hordes have moved north.
I know where they are. Eve has pointed me in the right direction.
which allows us to infer what I just said, and that Eve has not spoken to the angel, or at least she hasn't mentioned anything about Daniel. They're still on good terms since he says,
Ah, you've met Eve. She's a good ally to have. She can be trusted.
which is an odd statement for him to make given the lack of communication, unless Eve is good at deception, which we'll see is true at the end of the expansion. It does mean that they haven't been collaborating on information. Also, props for the angel mentioning the next destination, the ancient towers or the Tower of Babel, in the cutscene to give a sense of where we're going. Why does Eve get information faster than Heaven? I have a theory. We now know that the angel wasn't the person she went to talk to for more information on where Lucifer's armies are at the end of Chapter 2. So who's the only other character in the game that she could have talked to? Alistair. Now, as the kids say these days, just let me cook my crack pot theory for a second. Alistair is the only character that makes sense because it obviously can't be Daniel or Asmodeus, as they are right there in that cutscene. And now the angel has been disproven as a possibility. Lucifer doesn't make any sense because he'll just kidnap her like he does in Chapter 4's cutscene. There's also evidence within the game to give this theory credibility beyond deduction. The first is this line,
But in the end, he was blinded by his infatuation with you. It got the best of him.
I knew it would. He speaks as if it went according to his plan. Alistair wants Lucifer gone as he reveals his revolt against him in the same cutscene. Eve wants Lucifer gone because of his obsession with her and to take his power. Alistair may only be aware of that first part, and Eve plans to double-cross Alistair by becoming the ruler of Hell. She's aware of how the process works by touching Lucifer's dead body to absorb his power as told in the expansion's first cutscene. Her plan didn't work out as she thought. Still, she has that one-way portal out of their ability as a backup. Asmodeus being Lucifer came as a surprise to Eve, but it is almost certain that Alistair knew of this disguise given how he's Lucifer's top general. He did not reveal that to Eve so that she'll get captured after his defeat against Daniel. Alistair wanted Daniel to come to Hell to try and save Eve. He just didn't think that he would actually be able to kill Lucifer. At most, he probably thought that Daniel would be able to weaken him, allowing the revolting demons to swoop in to finish the job. Although Eve was aware that if Alistair was somewhere, then Lucifer wouldn't be far behind and that they should leave as told in Chapter 4's cutscene. But she was also surprised that Alistair was there, further adding on to his scheme to deceive Eve. It shows her fear of Lucifer and unawareness of Alistair's scheme to entrap her as bait for Daniel to save her. It also explains why, this time in Chapter 3, that Daniel gets directions on where the next and final general, Alistair, is from the angel rather than Eve. Their conspiracy is also hinted by this line.
He had to be removed from power. By the way, I'm of the We all came here for Lucifer. You just happened to beat us to it.
It's a bit hard to hear at the end there, but he says, by the way, I'm not the only one who agrees with this. This can refer to all of the minor demons around him, but the way he says it, along with the chuckle, makes it seem like he's referring to a specific person. He does add on to it right after that all the demons around him came to overthrow Lucifer. The line could be argued either way. The additional line could be clarifying what he just said, or adding on to it by referring to both Eve and the demons around him separately. It's too ambiguous to tell. If my theory that Eve and Alistair are in a conspiracy to overthrow Lucifer is true, then that's how Eve has been getting information on where Lucifer's armies are quicker than heaven. They know that whatever demons die in purgatory, even Alistair, will be sent back to hell so they don't lose anything besides time, which they have plenty of. Lucifer does mention in Chapter 3's cutscene that Alistair did not do what he was told. This could mean that Alistair plans to get the demons loyal to him killed in purgatory to have them back in hell ready to overthrow Lucifer. We do have Eve's muttering in the expansion's first cutscene about Alistair becoming the ruler of hell, how he would fall with another rising to rule, and Alistair threatening to kill Eve. Maybe it's a vision, maybe it's just a dream conjured up from what she has been hearing while unconscious, who knows. She probably knew that Alistair would have betrayed her one way or another. She just happens to get caught off guard. Eve benefits either way by having Lucifer dead. She'll just have to find another way to become the ruler of hell. I think this theory has enough to go on to at least entertain the idea of it. It does have a lot of moving parts, which makes it susceptible to holes. However, it's not like the game is going to spell it out for us. With 3 generals down, the angel mentions that only now is Lucifer aware of Daniel, and that he warned his right-hand man, Alistair, that Daniel is coming. Either way, it doesn't change anything in the gameplay, nor does Daniel's outburst lead to anything. The angel marks Daniel's map, and he's on his way to do heaven's bidding once again. One trend that I have noticed is that Daniel is getting angrier as the game progresses. A possible theory for that is because of the demon souls he has been absorbing. In the introduction cutscene, he's timid and just trying to be with Catherine again. After Chapter 1, he's already waving a shotgun around and has trust issues. That's understandable given how he doesn't know Eve, but do keep in mind that Daniel has already been in purgatory for about 30 years, so he's already more than hardened to what to expect in it. That also applies to the intro cutscene when he's talking to the angel. After their introductions, Daniel does trust Eve and isn't that confrontational anymore. Absorbing souls could also explain why we hear whispers at the end of this cutscene, and eventually the Dear Painkiller call out as his connection to the demonic realm grows. Chapter 2 Daniel is a bit more on edge from his wound. Yet, after the initial moment of pushing away Eve, this is the most at ease that we'll see Daniel for the rest of the game. You could extrapolate this to say that Daniel is becoming more closer and friendlier to demons, but he and Asmodeus do have an established friendship, possibly as long as Daniel has been in Purgatory. That may explain why Daniel doesn't act the same towards Eve, since he may see their relationship more as colleagues than friends, in addition to how comparatively short they've known each other. After Chapter 3 and what we've recently seen, Daniel is outraged enough to actually blow the angel's hand off, risking having to stay in Purgatory for longer or possibly sent to hell for the transgression. He does bring another rant against the angel in Chapter 4's cutscene. Daniel's rising aggression could just be the rising tension as the narrative reaches the climax, his frustration about being told that he's not pure despite his own belief, and having to wage a one-man war through Lucifer's generals with only logistical support given to him. So, absorbing demon souls may not be the only factor. Still, it's likely the main driving force of it with how it's acknowledged in the Chapter 4 and 5 cutscenes.
Have you been affected that much by the souls you've absorbed? Absorbing those demon souls has given you a tremendous amount of strength. I think it might have clouded your judgment.
The manual also clarifies that collecting 66 souls does temporarily morph Daniel into a demon. The Chapter 4 one with the angel really shows how much Daniel has changed from the first cutscene. That line, being the angel's immediate reaction after Daniel's rant, helps validate this theory as canonical. Speaking of canon, we have the issue of the trauma ending. Daniel enters heaven after defeating Alistair in Chapter 4, so all of Chapter 5 is inaccessible for that difficulty. It's not a canon ending because of how much story it cuts off, and it's a thrown-together cutscene in the first place, with a basic backdrop and no dialogue. I think it's safe to say that we can ignore the trauma ending in terms of how the story goes. The game doesn't explain how Daniel can absorb demon souls outside of the specific instance in the expansion of how anyone can touch the dead body of the ruler of hell to take their place. I think Daniel is able to because of that potion given to him from the angel in the introduction cutscene. Daniel has already been in Purgatory for at least 30 years and has already killed demons, yet in that cutscene, Daniel is timid compared to later in the game. If Daniel was absorbing souls for all that time, he would be fucking jacked with Roid Rage putting the smackdown on Lucifer. We can see this rage with an actual demonic growl from Daniel at the very end of the campaign.
Bring it on!
It may explain why Lucifer talks like Daniel had a choice of either siding with heaven or hell, not just because they were friends as Asmodeus, but also Lucifer sensing Daniel's demonic power.
You picked the wrong side, my friend. The wrong side.
There is something special about Daniel that made him get chosen to be heaven's hitman and to get befriended by Lucifer. We don't know exactly what that is, besides plot reasons. Could it be that tinge of impurity that prevents Daniel from entering heaven? Also, I have to mention this. The whole touching the dead body of the ruler of hell to take their power thing may explain why Daniel morphs into a demon after killing each boss. Besides, as a cool way to blast their limbs off, that surge of power from absorbing their soul causes him to turn demonic, the same as Daniel absorbing 66 souls from regular enemies. It seems like a cheat code to gain unlimited power since those demons aren't dead. They only get sent back to hell. The whole act of consuming demon souls is ethically concerning too. Asmodeus states that demons come to Purgatory to eat human souls in Chapter 2, and since Daniel is absorbing the demon souls, makes someone really question why the angel would give Daniel such a potion. Heaven probably views Daniel as nothing but a tool, so they wouldn't care if he gets corrupted or does questionable things for the sake of completing the mission. When the angel's identity is finally revealed in Chapter 4, it'll make more sense as to why he would agree to do this to someone when we look into his biblical connection. In the meantime, Daniel has some Dale's vaulting to do.